Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Marchman, host of the FireKeepers Global Summit, in which we will gather for powerful conversations with cutting-edge experts and thought leaders who will guide you to connect to your truest self and activate your natural gifts. This event is designed to reinstate the importance of carrying our soul-directed vision back into our communities so that ourselves and our communities will flourish. Here you're invited to learn how to seek the guidance of your inner voice so you can truly understand what it means to live life with purpose. So excited to talk to a good friend, mentor, and teacher of mine, Kedar Brown, who will be discussing the topic of rites of passage ceremony and the delivery of your medicine for the people. And I kind of want to welcome Kedar in by a quote that many of the listeners and the viewers might know where this quote's coming from Melodoma Some, who's a world-renowned author, teacher, and initiated elder of West Africa, and is also a shaman. And so Melodoma says that, "I have known Kedar for a long time as a man of spirit with remarkable devotion to healing. He tends to his duty with loyalty and ferocious commitment. As a man who hears the call of the earth and nature, Kedar extends his hand to those in quest of change and transformation, and is always willing to lead them into and guide them through a deep sense of communion with themselves. Having worked with him in a number of rituals and ceremonies, and watched carefully the way he gives of himself to spirit, I have come to respect his priestly devotion to the sacred in nature and in every human. His work deserves respect and reverence." Very powerful words. And I'm going to let Kedar also welcome in the group and welcome in himself. So thank you, Kedar.
Thanks, Ben. Yes, welcome everybody. And I want to begin with offering some gratitude. And gratitude to my teachers and to their teachers before them. And also gratitude to all those who have walked a path of awakening their soul-directed vision. All across the world, there have been various ways that people have found to do that, often by going into nature and spending some time there under the guidance of an elder, and praying and fasting and returning with some fire burning in their belly, in their heart for their people. So I want to also offer gratitude to the ancestors and all those that have come before us, and gratitude for our descendants that walk ahead of us and watch to see how we live our lives so they will know what to do when they get here. So I want to thank them for that trust and that accountability. And may the words that I have to offer you be adequate to the vision. Ashe. All right. Let's dive in. So where shall we begin, Ben? Did you have a question, or you want me to just start talking? I think you're on mute still, Ben.
Yeah, sorry about that. I double-clicked. I was clicking somebody else's audio off because there's some background noise there on somebody's. Yes, so thank you, Kedar, for that. And I'm just helping everybody welcome into the chat here as well. There's some people asking in the chat. And I guess before we dive into I guess all the questions, Kedar, because we can go in so many different directions with your work. I wonder if you wanted to kind of start from an overview first on kind of like your personal journey and how you came into this work of rites of passage ceremony and divination work, as well as your indigenous perspectives on ritual and so much more.
Yeah. Happy to do that. It's a journey that began probably before I was born. Now that I've traced some of the lineage of what's happened, But I would definitely say the calling. If we talk about rites of passage, having very distinct stages of calling, severance, threshold, and return. The calling in my life happened with my father's death when I was 32. That's like 28 years ago. And before then, when I was around 14, I had this vision and this desire to go into the wilderness under the guidance of an elder and be left there for some period of time. I didn't know what it was called. I didn't have a name for it. And nobody in my world really knew about that type of ceremonial experience. So it went underground and then resurfaced when my father died. I was 32 and working as a psychotherapist at the time. And following his death, he came to me in a dream, and we were standing in a little library, and he pulled a book off the shelf and he gave it to me, and it said Vision Quest. Now, he sold Mack trucks. This wasn't his world. Following that dream, I tracked down such a book and found Stephen Foster and Meredith Little at School of Lost Borders, and began to consider doing such an experience, going on this vision quest. And but I wasn't sure, because as things, the greatest medicine often we carry is also something that terrifies us the most. And so I was thinking about doing this and not sure. And the next thing that happened is I went home and I laid out these, I think they were called sacred path cards at the time. And I turned them upside down and drew one. It said Vision Quest. Shuffled them, drew another. It said Vision Quest. Shuffled them, drew another. And 3 times I drew the same card randomly out of a shuffled deck. And it was at that moment I realized something really important's happening here. Something way bigger than me. And began to consider going on this journey. And then I got invited to, a friend invited me to their church. And so I went, and I was sitting in the pew, and I was envisioning going out on the mountain and being out there. And I began to think about my own history and spiritual upbringing through Catholicism, how that no longer really resonated for me, but it also put me on the early stages of ritual. And so I was considering that, and I thought about the cross. The symbol of the cross in its pre-Christian context had 4 equal sides, and it was a symbol of protection. And so I thought about this, and I thought, when I'm out on that mountain and I'm having to deal with every fear that might come up, that'll be one of the things I carry in my medicine pouch. So the service ended, and I get a tap on the shoulder. And I'd only been in this church one time, never went to it again. Tap on the shoulder, and I turn around, and there are these 2 old people, both with really long gray hair. And the old man looks at me and he says, "I'm supposed to give you this." And he put that little cross in my hand. And I started to weep, and all I could say was, "Thank you." Still being a little bit hard-headed and mostly afraid. I just dropped maybe a week or 2 later, I dropped my daughter off at the daycare, and I came out of the daycare, and to set the stage, this is a rural country road in South Carolina. And I walk out of the daycare thinking about, I need to do something. And I'm still in the anguish of losing my father. And I look up, and they're going down this 2-lane country road, or these covered wagons. There were 3 of them, drawn by horses. I wasn't hallucinating. And on the side of the wagon, it said Vision Quest. And again, I just started to weep and pray. And I thought, something really, like, this is really starting to move me and frighten me more. And then the final experience of my calling, it was that I was working as a therapist in private practice, and I would drive across the Savannah River and go to this health club and work out several days a week. And it was just another day. I went across, worked out, went down to the locker room, and to get ready to come back, and I grabbed the locker and opened the door, and I got shot in the chest by 4 feathers. I didn't know they were 4 feathers at first. I just felt it hit me and scared the daylights out of me. And I looked around because it was so hard. It felt like somebody threw something at me. And I went looking around the locker room, even like in the shower, it's like nobody's here. And I walked back to my locker and I looked at it, and then I looked down on the floor, and there were 4 feathers that were taped at the end. They were red, yellow, black, and white, which at the time had another significant importance to me. So I called a friend and an elder of mine that had connection with the Sun Bear tribe at the time, and all he said is that he listened to this story and he said, "You better go do this, or they're going to get louder, and it may not be as friendly." So I wrote a letter. This was in '93. So I wrote a letter to Stephen and Meredith at the School of Lost Borders. Said, "I want to come do a quest with you. I need to go far away from home. I don't know why, but I need to." And so he wrote back and said, "We appreciate the depth of your story, and Meredith and I are getting older now, and we're not guiding anymore. But we'll teach you about this ceremony if you want to come out here." And he said, "We have one opening next year, and it's in September." So I wrote back and said, "I'm in." And the year rolls around. And fast forward to the last night of the quest, which is that symbolic death and rebirth night, on the mountain, in the Sierra Nevada mountains, about 9,000 feet. Actually, the third day of the quest, I had a vision that came in the form of a chant, and a lot of grief. And it said, and all it was "Bring the people home, bring the people home." And it was just with me all day, grieving and chanting, "Bring the people home." The last night of the quest, sitting there on that mountain, it occurred to me that it was 2 years to the very night that my father had died, when all of this woke up. This memory woke up in me. And so when I came down off that mountain, I knew that I had remembered that this is the direction I'm headed. And I say it that way because I think of soul-directed vision. When we say that word, what is soul-directed vision? From my teachers, I learned that a soul-directed vision is more of a memory that's in front of you, not behind you. It's a memory that is laid out in front of you based on agreements you would have made with your ancestors before coming into this world about who you were coming here to be and what medicine you were coming here to offer. And so they would say all true learning is simply remembering. And so finding myself on that path of remembering, I began to walk down that path and seek out other teachers. Of course, Stephen and Meredith, Rocking Bear and Melodoma, those that are not in the physical world. And what first looked like doing deep Death Lodge process with people in the woods to prepare them to go out on a solo began to shift and change as things began to happen that were not of the ordinary reality. And so being steeped in psychology, I'd gone as far as I could go with psychological explanations, and so began to sit and learn from indigenous people, primarily Rocking Bear and Melodoma and others that I had lesser connections to, but listening to, that could quickly make sense of what I was experiencing, and also offer guidance of how to do that, how to work with that. And so that's a quick thumbnail sketch of kind of how I ended up into this arena. But looking back at that 14-year-old boy, what I realize now is that the call to initiation, the call to awaken a soul-directed vision, is something that's in all of us. It's in our bones. It's in our ancestral bone memory. The absence of initiatory rites of passage in our culture, we often don't get those activating experiences that are designed to wake up those memories, to wake up those visions. And so as young people sometimes do, they will self-create initiations that are more dangerous than they are useful. So I look at it now as something that's latent, that's in us, that's wanting to be awakened. It's like if you ever bow drill a fire, you know, you're going to blow on the coal that you find is the hottest to get the fire to ignite. And so that bone memory of a soul-directed vision is in each one of us, like a hot coal waiting for some air, waiting for us to blow on it and give it some life. And then as it starts to wake up, it'll lead you down a path of belonging. I want to call it a path of memory and belonging that has been laid out. And it doesn't mean it'll be easy. I always say there are gatekeepers along the path that will challenge you and test you as you even walk that path. But that's a little bit of my story and how I got here. I think of, in my story, it began or got activated by my father's death, or being at his death, being by his side. And I've learned to think of initiatory rites of passage in more the global or the pan-cultural context of how all our ancient peoples knew this process of going into the wilderness, fasting, praying, having some solo time out there, and then returning with fire and vision, medicine for their people. When we look at even the major spiritual traditions on the planet, all of them began with somebody doing that very thing, going into the wilderness, fasting, praying for vision, and then returning with some medicine for their people. So in that more global context, I think it's something that's in us, that's just, as I say, it's just part of our bone memory that this is what needs to happen. And in the absence of it, there can be all kinds of catastrophes. But if you think of two rivers that flow side by side, going opposite directions, kind of hard to imagine, but imagine it. One river flows in the ordinary reality of our life, and that in this lifetime we can think of birth to death, at least in this one lifetime. And it flows along that way. And the other one flows from a different source in the opposite direction. And it flows from death to birth. And that most, if not all, great visions or journeys begin with loss, darkness, death. That's the beginning, the darkness. The same way in the old calendar, we used to celebrate the old calendar with the beginning was the dark time of the year. In the Celtic tradition, they would say Samhain. But when we enter into that dark time, this is the beginning time. So it's just as a word of encouragement, maybe for those that are struggling, feeling a dark time, that this is the seeding ground. And to seek out some guidance, to seek out some support in that time that can help you navigate the territory from a mythological orientation rather than a psychopathological orientation, to where we may, get all kind of labels and things done that aren't really helpful to the hero or the heroine's journey. And yet to look at it as from a mythological context, there is this thing that has to die before something can be born. And we don't want to misinterpret that as a literal thing, as some people sadly do. And yet find ways to navigate that soul descent with someone who knows how to navigate the territory. And certainly there are countless people in the world that know how to do that. So that's yeah. Those are some words that initially come to mind around the whole journey. I remember Michael Meade saying one time. He said, "Think of it as there are two elemental trajectories of initiation, and one we would say would be by fire, and elementally, that is an initiatory ascent, and that is an initiation by fire, meaning." Like a genie possession, some might call it. Like one is overtaken by a genie, they can't stop, and it has this drive, this passion, this vision that's just propelling them forward. And they too need a guide. Like I've seen people have that kind of genie possession, and it can kill you if you don't know how to navigate with that. And then he talks, another is the initiatory initiation by the element of water. And water is about a descent, a soul's descent into the river, bottom of the river, soul canyon. And this is initiation into memory and belonging and ancestry and soul and healing and reconciliation. And that's a different kind of trajectory. And it too has its challenges along the way. But when we think about rites of passage, that we go out on the mountain. We go out on sacred mountain, not for yourself, but for your people, human and non-human people, to remember more of who you are so that you may bring this back and deliver it in a good way. Because the medicine you carry is like your thumbprint. No one else carries what you carry. And your coming here means that you brought something here that the rest of us need. And so finding ways to wake up and activate that connection to that medicine you carry and bring it. Because this is we live in a time where we don't need more information about what's wrong. We need people willing to stand up and do and be who they came here to be. So that's some of the fire that burns in me. That's some of that vision, bring the people home. Is to stand in your own medicine. Because you don't want to be living a life that's not your own when you go to join your ancestors. And they say, what did you do down there?
And I just love the whole story, how you weave that in there. It's so amazing. And bring the people home. That's just, it's what the summit's all about. How are we bringing this, how are we bringing this vision that we all are always seeking? Mm-hmm. Like your elders and teachers that you're saying, it's that question that's always a step ahead of you. And
this memory that lies in front of us.
Yeah, memory.
Fun to think about it. That it's got a familiar frequency to it. The images of it we know, but but the life we're in may not be the one we're headed to, and yet it calls us just as real as if we are remembering something behind us.
Yeah, definitely. And I wonder if you wanted to expound a little bit, Kedar, on. We've hinted a lot on rites of passage with. Even with other speakers too, but in your case, I wonder if you want to discuss like the stages and how they can show up in our lives today, and from your background and wisdom.
So the stages, the awakening to the call. I think, as I say, I think it's there. I know it's there when we're little, and I believe generally up until the age of 4 or 5, there's still connection. There's not the languaging and the cognition to communicate that connection. And if there were, it often gets dismissed as magical thinking or something. I think it wakes up again in adolescence in some raw form. But this calling keeps resurfacing, nudging us. And, the calling that I described that was activated by loss. Loss or death or great challenge can activate the call, because it's in those places where we're no longer where we were, and we're not yet where we're headed, and we have no clue of what to do. It's to borrow a phrase from Joanna Macy, it's that knife's edge of uncertainty when we're most alive. And I think it's when we can most be available to hear Spirit's call to us. So it can be, it can look like that. It can look like an awakening that comes through more pleasant means, kind of like the ones I described, and that followed my father's death. These things started to happen that I couldn't explain. It can happen by illness or tragedy. It's something that generally breaks you open from the outside, meaning that it's not within your thought process to choreograph. I remember talking with a person one time, and they said they had discovered that they were needed to let go. So they had choreographed their own letting go ceremony. And I was thinking, that's not the kind of letting go I think we're talking about here. I think we're talking about one where we're broken open. Mm-hmm. And all we can do is cry out for something unknown. That kind of surrender awakens the call. Something meets us in that place that we recognize but have no clue what it is. And so the calling can look like a lot of different things. But once you respond to the call, there's what I call responding to the call, or if you think of Joseph Campbell's stages of the hero-heroine's journey, similarly so, if you respond to the call and you begin to follow this thread of information or direction, or then there's the refusing the call. And to refuse the call is, I guess you could still live a noble life and die well, but certain things may escape you, and at what cost we don't know. To borrow a couple lines from William Stafford. But responding to the call is begin to follow such a thread of nudging and information, and we can recognize it by its aliveness in us. There's a certain aliveness we begin to feel. But what also happens if we think about the second stage of an initiatory passage, a rite of passage, is called the severance. Sometimes I refer to it as the death lodge. Severance is where we begin those old ways of loving. That's what I call them. Old ways of loving begin to get challenged. We have old ways of old things we believe, thoughts, feelings, ways of being in the world. They no longer work. And they begin to crack or fade away or fall or get taken, just all of a sudden they get swept away. And what the beliefs and things we counted on are all of a sudden not there. This severance phase. So we're severing from either intentionally, it can be done intentionally or unintentionally, where we're being severed from certain ways of being in the world and understanding the world that are no longer there. And so in this severance phase or death lodge phase, we're nudged closer to the threshold. So to leave one's familiar places, people, attachments, to begin to let go of those and respond more deeply to this call requires one to do that. This is what I call the gatekeepers along the way. You encounter certain gatekeepers that say you can't bring that past here. You have to put that down. Can't do that here. And then you also meet certain guides along the way that say, I'll show you how to walk across this river right here. But that's as far as I can take you. And then you'll find somebody else. So they're guides and they're gatekeepers to challenge where offerings have to be made along the way. Sometimes those offerings are a very way of being or understanding ourselves in this severance phase. And then we come to the threshold phase. The threshold phase is that time in the desert, that time on the mountain. It refers to we're no longer where we were, but we're not yet where we're headed. We're betwixt in between. And in the threshold phase, this is where we reach out, cry for, fast, pray, go out on the mountain. It's what most people think of when they hear the word vision fast or vision quest or walkabout. They think of the solo time, but that's just one phase of the process. But it's in that experience where you are cracked open even more. And maybe even the very reason that you thought you were going out on this mountain, you lose that too. And you wonder what the hell you're doing out there. It's not what you thought. And something else begins to happen. But all those masks that we've learned to wear to identify ourselves to ourselves begin to fade away. In the stones, in the river, in the standing tall people, they don't care what mask we wear. They're just being themselves. And eventually we find that frequency or hear that song that is our song. And that looks like a lot of things, but it's usually where I say that's where this connection to something greater than ourselves happens. In the long time ago days, there was no guarantee of survival of a quest or survival of a rite of passage. That one may literally not survive it. Today, most modern day versions of a rite of passage carry a lot of perceived risk and some real risk, but perceived certainly. And perceived is good too. It'll do the job. So this threshold phase, this reconnecting with something greater, and then this, we have to let go. I say let go so deeply that spring can simply show up because you let go enough. And maybe for no other reason. But in the letting go, the clarity starts to filter in. And with that clarity, some nudging, some organic nudging toward a vision or an action to take. And so now we're talking about the return phase. In the title of Ben's summit, that's carrying soul-directed vision. So this return to the village, return to your people. It can be thought of as a return, and yet to truly have gone through the experience, who's coming off the mountain is not the same person that went on. It's impossible. But someone returns. Something maybe of the more of the blueprint of who you are returns. With some images, some of vision or direction of what actions to take. And so you return to your people, to your village, carrying this. In a lot of traditions, there's some reenactment of the vision. It could be a dance, it could be a storytelling. There's something that reenacts the experience as a ceremonial offering, what we call the giveaway. But the real giveaway ceremony is how you live your life going forward. It's less about what you say and more about how you live. And how do you carry this? And how do you offer this to those that are also looking for a trailhead? Maybe you can point them in the direction of that trailhead yourself. And so you might want to look under that rock over there. I think there might be something for you. But you carry this aliveness back. So the calling, the severance, the threshold, the return, let's say the incorporation, which can take months, years, a lifetime. This idea of living into the vision. Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst, and later Joanna Macy and more our time, had this quote. They said that there's a great question that lives inside each one of us, and you're very fortunate if you can find that question. And I would add, may the question be one that encompasses a lifetime to live into. And maybe at best, all you can do is hand off the baton to the next generation, because all you can do is live into it as far as you can and then pass it forward. But this idea of living into a vision, living into a question, reminds me of that understanding of medicine names. When people often come off the mountain, there are stories where they acquire a new name. And these names are not comfortable when you get them. They shouldn't be comfortable. If they're comfortable, then they're maybe just a description of how people see you currently. But these medicine names are not meant to be comfortable because you have to live into them. And it may take your life to get there. And maybe you don't get all the way there. But they're meant as beacons of light on the trail that you can follow. So that when you hear that name spoken, it calls you into a life of belonging, of one that you belong to. So I think of the stages that way. Again, the calling, the severance, the threshold, the return, the incorporation, and the giveaway, or how I think about it.
Yeah, and thanks for weaving those in and under an hour. I mean, it can take a lifetime to explain those.
Yes, to live those, certainly. Several, maybe.
It's almost like we could do this whole hour in those stages, if you think about it. Even though we're online. Yeah, thank you, Kedar, for expounding on that. And kind of going into like the navigation piece, which we're always wondering. And yeah, and I love that quote by Joanna Macy, Carl Jung, and then I guess later Joanna Macy, and maybe we all live into that. I think that's a really more than practical way to look at it.
to find the great question that burns inside of you that you want to live into, to bring some medicine to.
We're not really at the top of the hour yet, but I did want to make sure we had some time to like really expound a little bit more on like another piece, if you want to go that direction.
You have to keep me on track. I don't have a clock, so I'm just
yeah. This past work with you, it's hard for both of us to stay on track. Yeah, so like when somebody say what?
The rabbit hole.
The rabbit holes that we can all go down, which I've definitely done with past speakers. So yes, we kind of touched base a little bit too at the beginning, like navigating that territory of carrying a soul-directed vision and like how to better understand that. And so I'm assuming a lot of the listeners and viewers are kind of asking like maybe the how question, or like when we know. When would be a really hard one to, I guess, answer, but like when or how do we know when we're in that soul communication space, and like how to navigate that?
Well, to set yourself on a course of intentionally stepping into these stages with a guide of someone that can, whether you do it without necessarily having to disconnect from your life for months, or you just over time you do a little bit of time. The preparation for such a thing is Also to live your life with death as your ally. That's what I've learned. Not an easy practice, but to live life with death as your ally means you live passionately and stay awake. You move toward the threshold phase, set in your life in order as if you were to leave this world at that time, since it's a death and a rebirth experience. So you begin to enter, in a way, you enter the death lodge of the severance, which is, who do I need to speak with? What do I need to do to make right so I can have a good death? As they say, to have a good death means you lived a good life. So what is unresolved in my heart to have a good death? And set about doing that so that you are cleaning up whatever baggage might be weighing on you before the threshold phase. Even if you do, say, like a one night or a day in nature, it's the intention moving toward the ceremony. I'll give you one good Death Lodge ritual that I like, that I sometimes give out, is it can be an all-night fire vigil. I did this on a quest myself a few years ago, where you set a fire. And if you can't do this outside, you set a candle. But fire is very much part of the situation. It's the element of activation. So you set a fire, campfire that you can spend the night with, or a candle you can sit with. And on the other side of the fire, you set a seat for anyone that needs to come to your fire during the night. So if you're camping doing this, you have enough wood, and you want to have a small fire because it requires a lot of small wood to keep it going, and that keeps you awake. So you feed the fire throughout the night. You do an invocation, and you call upon, let the universe know and the spirits know that you are, and your ancestors know that you are opening your death lodge. And you're calling on the support of your helping ancestors to sit with you during the night. And the seat across the fire is meant for anyone that shows up. And here's the thing. What your job is to not think about who you need to talk to, but just to sit there and tend fire. And know that whoever needs to come to that fire will come to that fire. And they'll surprise you. All of a sudden, you're aware that, oh, this person's there. And maybe they're not a surprise. Maybe you expected them, even though you weren't thinking about them. And there are words to be spoken or something to be listened to. And this goes on through the night. Maybe there are hours in between visitations. You're just tending fire. As the sun, before the sun starts to rise, we enter that phase we call the false dawn, where it starts to get light and you think the sun's going to come up. It seems like it takes for hours. So you enter that period of false dawn, you let the fire start burning down. And as it burns down to ashes, and the sun starts to rise, and just to back up a little bit, you want to orient yourself looking west, across the fire into the west to do this ritual, so that as the sun rises behind you, you step, if you're doing a fire, you step into the ashes of your old life. Maybe even put a little bit on you, like the phoenix. And then you turn and you face east, you face the rising sun, you face your new life. And you don't know what's ahead on that, you don't know what's down that road, but you do know that you've come to this crossroads of completion. And so as the sun rises, you step out of the ashes of your old life, stepping into the east, into the rising sun, and you walk toward that new day. And so that's what I call it, like a death lodge ritual or a severance ritual. That one can enact. My suggestion, if you're going to be camping doing this during the night, that when you walk away from that fire, that it not be a place you go back to, at least for a year, if then. Maybe you don't ever go back there, but you want to set your gear into the east. So when you turn and step away, you pick it up and you walk east, heading out. So that's an all-night fire vigil. It's a really good, I call severance ritual, or it could be done during a solo time. And then the other, more simply, is again, live with death as your ally. It's a teaching in many sacred traditions, which really means to live life with full compassion and aliveness, and to love fiercely and without fear, and speak the truth. Be impeccable with your words and actions. So that would be, again, plugging yourself into some kind of the initiatory passage. Understanding those phases would be a good way to, and then having some kind of guide that you can touch base with along the way as you're in those passages. And then the return. The return I consider the most difficult. Because when you return from such an experience, be it 4 days and nights or even doing that, nobody really knows or understands what you just did. And so finding other people that understand and can mirror back for you what they hear in your story is important. Because that will be the hardest part, is how to keep that fire burning, as you return.
Yeah, can agree with that. And we'll make sure we have time for some questions too. I had a couple questions arise on that, but don't want to go, I guess, too far over. Which, but also, since I guess you kind of went into a little bit of ritual too, and there's so many other questions that I wanted to ask you, and like how that can assist us moving forward. I'm kind of feeling like an energy to like help the group interact with you, if you don't mind. Like maybe we can start some dialogue, and we can kind of create I wouldn't say ritual, but create like a sacred dialogue around what that means to people in the group. Like
can unmute all these mics that I see.
Sure. Yeah. I know some of you might be on your phone, so when I unmute and there's background noise, and I'll just mute you. So I'm gonna unmute everybody. And if you want to interact with Kedar on anything that's kind of came up, then I guess the best way, we kind of did this last call, is if you have a candle, raise your candle up to your face and kind of wave it. It's kind of like raising your hand, or just raise your hand and we'll click on you instead of everybody talk at once. And here we go.
All right, laughter. Let's begin with that.
Vicky.
Everybody's got to get up and go get a candle.
Oh no, you can
just to kind of hold up your lighter or pretend like you got a candle. But for those that don't have any faces on the thing. There's
Okay.
Yes, Vicky.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you again.
Good to see you, my friend. I completely forgot and missed the first half of this talk, but I hope you do a recording.
Sorry.
Sounds like a personal problem. It's good to see you, and your words are fabulous. I did want, but I can give it later. I'll listen to the recording, those steps that you had, the calling, the severance, all of those. I had never heard all of those in order, so thank you very much for that.
You're quite welcome.
Does anybody have like a burning memory that's they're trying to reach, as Kedar was kind of pointing at, that they're working on, or it could be a question from something he said?
Or notice what in all that conversation caught your attention and won't let you go. And then say something about that.
Okay, I'll wave my hand.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Valerie.
Oh no, this is Vicky.
Go ahead, Becca.
Oh yeah, hi.
Oh,
I don't know if I'm supposed to push any buttons or anything, but this is Vika. And hi, Kedar. It was
Hey,
good
good to see you
to see you
again.
again. I guess what got activated in me as I was listening to you was being present to the seasons, especially because I'm normally on Maui where you don't see season quite in the same way as you do on the mainland. And so now that I'm temporarily this week here in Boston, it's so cold and there's so much less light and things like that. And so I've been thinking about the seasonal transitions and coming to Imbolc, and for me, how I've always held this to be a very encouraging and hopeful time, because as whatever passage I might be moving through, I've always felt that at this time, even though I can't really see sort of the light at the end of the tunnel or spring or even next summer or any of those things, I'm still in a bit of darkness. I know in my deepest soul that there is this quickening underground that's happening, underground within me, underground within the actual ground, and you know that the dreams that live there, the dreams that are part of the calling that you were just talking about, they will be born. You know, it'll be a birth canal experience, but birth will happen and spring will come. And even though sometimes, I think you mentioned it somewhere in there about we don't need to talk anymore about how dark things are, or I don't remember exactly what your words were, but yeah, it's true. It's like we've got plenty of darkness around us. And so this time of year for me just is a time where I can use that, even if it's just one candle, that little bit of light to carry me forward. We're past solstice, we're moving into more light, and the dreams and visions that I carry may not all be clear or visible at this time, but they're coming. So that's what was kind of alive in me as you were speaking. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
Mm.
Yeah. Is anyone else? Any questions? How about some answers?
Question.
Yeah, go ahead, Valerie, and speak a little closer to your mic if you can.
Yep. Question. How do I know who my people are?
The crossroads where your passion intersects with the needs of your people, in that crossroads where you feel most alive, where they recognize what you have to offer is something they need.
Who is they?
Your people.
Who are they?
So it also is about standing up more clearly, we could say casting a bigger shadow of the medicine you carry, what you have to offer, so that you can become visible to those that are looking for you. Because there are ones looking for you that you are also looking for. And what they're looking for is this genius that you in particular carry. And so instead of looking for them so much, really stand in that medicine, stand in that genius, stand in that beauty that you are. And then you become visible to the ones that are looking for you, ones we will call your people. And those are human and non-human. I use that term loosely, people. But this search for belonging that you speak of may also require some kind of some ancestral line clearing healing. If it's something that has been set in place, a pattern of lost belonging that has pre-existed you, that has been following you, your life, then it may be one that requires ritual in itself to address the lineage from which it may come from. So there ways to look into where does this severance of belonging, where did it occur? How long has it been alive? And is it really yours, or did you just come in to help heal it for yourself and those before you? So there are certain inquiries that I would want to look to with you to figure out, where are these obstacles to belonging? And then what ritual prescriptions would be suggestive of responding to those obstacles? So we think of that way of thinking about it, that ritual is a prescriptive response to our challenges. There's an old Irish proverb that says the troubles in this world can only be mended from the other world, and the troubles in the other world can only be mended from this world. So there's this reciprocal relationship to our ancestors. When I say ancestors, I don't mean the unwell dead. It's a different category, but more the bright and shiny realm of helping ancestors that are to assist in the healing of those kind of things. So usually when people bring me questions of that, of belonging, it leans me more toward thinking about earth rituals as a potential response that may be called for. But I would need to look more specifically into where is the obstacle? When did it begin? So it may not be your own that you're feeling, that may have been there before you. Is that helpful?
Yes. And could it have to do with actual ancestors, genealogy and lineage?
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of times patterns of belonging have or disconnection have been set in place ancestrally, blood lineage, or when we're adopted, we still sign on to the frequency of that lineage. So it's in the lineage that these patterns of disconnection and a search for belonging may have occurred. It could have occurred culturally, as we've seen in many different cultures, of people being dislodged or forced from, and those feelings of belonging become, then start to move through the bloodline like a hungry ghost, looking for healing. And so it would also tell me, Valerie, that because you see this, you must also have the antidote of healing it. Because there are others who have fallen to that, maybe within your lineage have fallen to that turmoil and never saw it. So there's something about you seeing it that tells me you must somewhere in there have the antidote or resources to activate the antidote for healing.
I think I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I also feel I need more from someone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, looking into that feeling of needing more from someone, that would be the portal to dive into. And what is the connection to those someones that are needed? Oftentimes we project that sense of disconnection onto the human population and the search for that someone.
Yeah.
And that's not where the disconnect often is. That kind of search often ends in finding plenty of someones that never complete or fill the void. So I would be curious to look more deeply into that with you about what is this connection looking for, and is it in is it ancestrally? Is it your relationship to your own spirit helpers? What is it? What is the connection that needs to be fed?
Well, I liked that Irish proverb a lot.
Okay, so that caught your attention.
County Mayo.
There you go. Just around the corner from my people. So yeah, so there's something there. That tells me immediately some about at least the cultural dislocation of belonging that occurred for those people, for those ancestors.
When I went to Ireland, I felt like I went home.
Mm-hmm.
I could breathe the air so wonderfully, the moist air and all the green.
Yeah. So there would be, again, if I was to prescribe an earth ritual just based on what I'm hearing, I would not only want to connect you ancestrally, but connect you to the very land to get some of that earth, and to begin to connect with that, the land that remembers your name, and begin to work with that. So it healed this. Earth is often the elemental response to a belonging need.
So just to let everybody know, we're at the top of the hour, and that was very good dialogue, Valerie. Thank you for bringing that. I wish we could allow everybody's time to ask their questions and allow Kedar to create some dialogue, but I think we would need probably the whole evening here. So, and so Kedar, I might end this one a different way if you don't mind. I'll allow you some time to share your free gift, and then we'll end with like some words of wisdom from you, if you feel comfortable doing that.
Oh, free gift, thanks. So if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll receive a audio version of a story called Singing Stone. A story that I learned originally from Stephen Foster and Meredith Little some 28 years ago. That I have taken the storyteller's license of great embellishment, but at the same time keeping the plot line pure. And so you get that automatically. The other is that if you sign up within the window of this summit, your name will be entered into a drawing for a cowrie shell divination. And you can read about that in the material. I think Ben has a link somewhere.
Yeah, and if you look on Kedar's speaker page, you'll see his free gift, and then also his website where you can find his bio and read more of his bio, and also his information there. Yeah, okay. So is there any words of wisdom you want to leave us with, or could be a short story? Where do you feel pulled for?
Maybe a short story. We're going to run over just slightly, but
that's okay. Yeah.
Story Melodoma shared with me. I love this story because it's really that whole death is your ally story. So he told me this story. He said, yes, in the village, there was this man one night that was asleep in his hut. And he woke up in the middle of the night and he turned and there was death sitting right there beside of him. And he freaked out. He said, scared him to death. And he got up and he started running. He ran. And then he paused and he thought about it for a moment and he thought, this isn't far enough. Death's probably still close. So he took off running again and he ran way into the night and he was exhausted. He fell over, fell asleep. And then how that jolt sometimes your body will get when it jolts awake? Well, that happened to him and he jolted awake and he thought about it again. He said, oh, this is not far enough. So he took off running again and he ran to the furthest outpost village he could get to. And finally just collapsed from exhaustion, couldn't even wake up, not even with the jolt from his neurons firing in his brain. He just was out. Nightfall came on. He starts to finally wake up as the evening's coming on again. He's finally waking up and he opens his eyes and he looks beside him and there's death looking right at him again. And his eyes get big as saucers and death looks at him and death says, I came to see you way back there in the first village to tell you I would meet you here. Oh, what life I missed. that's the teaching of death as an ally. You know,
Mhm.
it can teach us how to live and to love and yeah,
Yeah.
just to live a good life, to live well and die well, as they say.
Yes.
Thank you, Kedar. And thank you everybody from come to circle around the fire with your video. Even though it seems like it's weird, it can be awkward for some of us, but thank you for sitting with us and hearing from Kedar today. And Kedar, I just really, really appreciate it as always when I hear your words, and I hope that all the listeners and the viewers are really listening to this call and this soul stirring that you are awakening in all of us. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. It's been a real honor to be here, and it's good to see everybody. Thank you all for joining.
And as we sit the fire, we can a good way to end this, instead of just all of this logging off at once, is you can feel free to just look at everybody. It's always nice to look at everybody's faces, and then you can nod when you're heading off, or just give a sign and just log off at your own will. But
Thank you, Ben, for making this possible.
you're welcome, Mariana. It's good to see you again.
Thank you, Ben. I've never met you, but I'm really grateful for what you're doing. I wish you well.
Go well, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.